So this is what I've got to think is the most fascinating portion of this, and this is something nobody else gets to see except you guys and some other VIPs. Would be Ohio State goes out there with arguably the best running back group in the country, the best wide receivers, et cetera, down the line, and they're beating up on 8 or 9 opponents. And then they play 2 or 3 tough games, and then they get to match up against talent on the other side. Obviously, every team has their star or 2 or 5 to match up against Ohio State, but by and large can't. The fascination would be seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. taking on Denzel Burke and seeing the stars on one team and see who the true alpha dogs are when those guys match up along the lines, especially because it's easy to along the lines is obviously extremely important. But for me, I think it's just easy to differentiate wide receiver, corner. Let's watch these two go at it. They're all Americans. How good are it's almost like Jerry Rice and Deion Sanders when they would play in the playoffs for the Cowboys and Niners, and the fascination of these guys are the 2 best at what they do. Oh, this is going to be ridiculous to watch them go at each other.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that, and I think in the spring we got a little bit of a taste of that. Jeremiah Smith, the outstanding freshman, was coming in, and he was repping against Denzel Burke, and there was one play maybe at the student appreciation practice where he outleaped Denzel Burke. Burke kind of bounced off of him, and then Smith turned and ran the last 30 yards for like a 60-yard touchdown. I mean, that's a spectacular 1-versus-1 type play that you just don't get to see very often. And Denzel Burke kind of downplayed it. You know, he's like, oh, you guys want to make a big deal about that one play. You don't talk about the 5 where he didn't do anything against me. And, you know, and I understand that. I mean, players have to have their defense mechanism up to defend their turf and that type of thing. But, I mean, he's a great player in his own right, certainly Burke. So you make a great point that those are the reps that are most useful, I think, for coaches and observers to see who can really do it when the light is shining the brightest and when it is the best on one side against the best on the other. I sent a note in for our site today about Jack Sawyer talking about Josh Simmons. And in that same vein, Josh Simmons, the left tackle, he described him as an athletic freak. He said that his feet are as good as just about anybody he's ever practiced or played against. He said maybe the one guy who was in the same vein that he was in terms of his nimble feet as an offensive lineman was Paris Johnson, who was the 7th overall pick by the Arizona Cardinals in the 2023 draft. So that's pretty high praise. And again, that just comes from those guys, you know, going head to head so much that they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I take that as a good sign. If Jack Sawyer believes that Josh Simmons is that good potentially, and he also made some comments about Carson Hinsman as one of the hardest working guys on the team, and that Ryan Day said that the right tackle, whose name is now escaping me,
Josh Fryer.
Josh Fryer had as good an offseason as anybody. You know, if those 3 guys are, you know, all playing their best football, you know, and then you have Seth McLaughlin, who's pretty good coming from Alabama, and Donovan Jackson, who may be the best lineman on the team, that tells me the offensive line could go from being a weakness to a strength on this team almost overnight, which I mean, if that's the last weakness that they've got to knock out, that's pretty good. So, yeah, coming all the way back to your thought of, you know, the best against the best, they'll have that and they'll do that. I don't know that we're going to get to see that here in this first 3 or 4 days, though.
It is always interesting to watch the one-on-ones with the receivers and the corners, and you know, we'll all take notes, and I'm jotting down, you know, 4 versus 7, the win goes to 4, you know, from 10 in terms of like who the receiver was, who was the quarterback was who threw the ball. just so I can, jot that down, have it, put it in a notebook or whatever, and just have an idea of who's winning a bunch, who's not winning, and who's making the throws. And it is fascinating. That's when everybody pretty much just stops and watches that, provided you can see over the crowd in front of you, which isn't always easy to do. But yeah, those are the fun ones, and those get a little ramped up. And we may see some of that this week. I think we probably will. But again, as Steve said, there's no pads or anything like that, so it's very, very basic. But this is a veteran team, so I think they'll be able to move along quicker in terms of what they're doing. But you can only do so much without pads and your installation and all of that stuff. So it's still very basic. And as Dave said last week, the quarterback situation is going to be split all over the field, all over the fields the first 4 days. So they're all going to be throwing the ball. They're all going to be split pretty evenly, and just trying to get as much work as they can so they can start paring things down after that. But it's always fun watching the one-on-ones, and you get over and watch the linemen go at it as well, and the hand fighting that goes in there. But the star of the show is always the passing game.
Steve, Tony and I were talking before we started to record here that typically there's a handful of players, if we were talking about just about any other team in the country, where we'd be talking about, okay, the prized freshman from the previous class who sat behind 3 experienced players and really didn't do much. Now let's watch him ascend and see if he can break through, or, various categories of players that, okay, can this guy break through? Can that guy break through? There's a need at this position. Somebody's got to break through. But this team is almost void of that category of player. It would certainly help from a depth situation to see some guys break through. So Tony, it sounds like you've got a couple of names gathered up possibly.
Well, and Steve mentioned one. I think Josh Simmons is a guy that Ryan Day has raved about in terms of the athleticism. And last year was his first year playing left tackle. He was a right tackle before that. That was his first year of doing that at not just that position, but at this level. And he got better as the year went on. Has all of the athleticism tools that you want. So I kind of expect him to excel this year. And I think, and I wrote about it a few weeks back, I expect this to be a Joe Moore finalist offensive line for the Buckeyes. So, really you can throw in pretty much everybody from that offensive line as risers, even though they are all starters. I think there is also criticism of some of the starters at Ohio State, whether it is like a G. Scott, who's going to be a starter. There's plenty of criticism directed his way. There's concern about what he can do. We've seen Lathan Ransom have his ups and downs at Ohio State. I expect him to be very, very, very good. But I think maybe a guy that we aren't talking about as much, and I think the coaches are completely confident in, is Cody Simon at middle linebacker. He's going to be the leader of the defense. He's got experience starting at middle linebacker. He was there before Tommy I think he was there, and then Tommy Eichenberg took over, and Cody Simon played for a year, I think in 2021 or 2022 with a bum shoulder and was still playing. So he's got that experience. He understands the defense. He knows it. And this is year 3 of the defense. So you're going to have a lot of guys playing very, very well. I would love to see Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry step up as the backups at defensive end so that they can have a rotation. And if those 2 guys can step up and you have a full rotation at defensive end, I think that would be great for down the line, down the season. But, offensively, in terms of guys that are going to step up or, the unknowns, I'd say keep an eye out on James Peoples, who is not going to have a ton of reps in the first half, but could be the guy that closes games out in the blowouts and could have a pretty good year. And then don't forget about Brandon Ennis, who was the #1 receiver in the 2023 class, redshirted last year, or whether he redshirted or not, it doesn't really matter. He's not going to be here for 5 years anyway. So he's a guy that will be able to step in for Emeka Ibuka in the slot, can do some things. I wouldn't be shocked if he's on special teams, maybe in terms of a punt return or something like that, to get him involved more. Ryan Day even mentioned him as a possibility as a running back should things go really, really bad for them in that way. He played a quarterback his senior year at American Heritage because there was an injury there. So he's comfortable running between the tackles. He's, 5'11", probably like 205. So he's built like a running back kind of anyway. And I think there's a lot of different things you can do with him.
I'm going to bring up a name that on the surface doesn't seem like it would be anywhere close to that category. But what about Will Howard in this way? Okay, the initial thought, and I'll put myself in this category as well, of just thinking Will Howard's Will Howard. He's played 2.5 years. He's not going to get any better. He is who he is. So he's only going to get better statistically by the exceptional players around him. However, it's not like he's Tom Brady. He's not been playing forever. And even, I've heard Tom Brady talk about how his arm strength improved throughout his NFL career after rep and learning more. Will they take a Will Howard and break down his footwork, his game to make him an even better player and not just say, hey, he's got 2.5 years experience. He just needs to run the offense and be the same Will Howard here as he was at Kansas State. He'll just have better stats.
Yeah, you make a great point there. I think that he still has a lot of proving to do to the coaches and to his teammates. I think there was a time Denzel Burke was quoted at one point saying that he just hadn't seen Will Howard turn it loose yet. And a lot of that could have been due to the spottiness of the pass protection or, again, not having all of his receivers. Emeka Egbuka was still a little bit gimpy in the spring, coming back from injury. And so was Brandon Ennis. So those two of the top 4 receivers weren't there. At the same time, I think we did see some good things out of a couple of the younger guys like Kojo Antwi and Bryson Rogers. I think they did some good things, I thought, in the spring to maybe earn some reps in preseason camp, maybe even some playing time in the fall. But, it's time for the receivers to come on. Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis need to make a quantum leap from last year where they were just kind of, on the periphery of what was going on as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Fleming and Egbuka did all the heavy lifting. Well, it's their time to take the star turn and really up. And if that happens, then that should really help Howard and Brown and the quarterbacks to get the job done. So I think Howard does have a lot to prove still. I think it's his job, and it would be very difficult to unseat him. But at the same time, I think that confidence in what everybody believes in him, I think he needs to go out and show it. He needs to go out and earn it. And that starts, tomorrow's first practice. He's got to go out and he's got to own it. And I think that's what Ryan Day wants to see out of Will Howard. I'm sure they're challenging him. Hey, man, take control of this thing. Go get it. Go grab the brass ring. And that's really what they need to see out of him.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Like, we have not been able to see what he can do at his best because he's had Kansas State's talent around him. So I think he's been challenged by what he has at Ohio State. But from talking to people, he's answered the challenge over the summer. In the winter and the spring, he's learning the offense, getting a feel for it. Now he has a better understanding of it, and then a better understanding of who he's throwing the ball to. I go back to Ryan Day with Justin Fields, Tate Martell, how the standard back then was that it takes a year to learn the offense. And that's one of the reasons Tate Martell was so confident that Justin Fields was not going to be able to handle it. And of course, Fields comes in and is the de facto starter immediately. But that was also because there was nobody really. I mean, he was competing with Matthew Baldwin at that time. So this is a much stiffer competition for Will Howard, but the experience that he has is irreplaceable. And if Devin Brown and Will Howard play grade out the same in fall camp, they're going to go with the guy with more experience because you have more information. That gives you more information. You saw how well he played against Texas down the stretch, nearly, beating the Longhorns, and he's won a conference championship. So these are things that he has done that Devin Brown hasn't. So that is information. So it's kind of like, how the contender has to beat the champion. You have to legitimately beat the champion. I think Devin Brown has to legitimately beat out Will Howard. And I don't know how many people expect that.